As mandatory minicamp kicks up, Danielle Hunter is not expected to be there. The holdout officially begins. What do we make of all this and all your other questions on the Locked On Vikings podcast?
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Luke Braun, and hey, let's find some joy today. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is an audio platform or YouTube, or even Amazon Fire or Roku. You can find them there. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. You can find all the Locked On Minnesota Sports shows there. Thank you so much to those of you who do listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I can't thank you guys enough. Today on the show, it is Twitter Tuesday. That means I am taking your questions as asked to me via Twitter at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings, or via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. There's also a Google form in the show notes. You can also leave a YouTube comment if you so choose. I'll find your question and I'll either answer it right there or save it for later. So let's get into it. And the first couple of questions are about, I think, the biggest news of the day, which is that Danielle Hunter expected to not show up to mandatory minicamp. That makes it an official holdout. The difference is, the OTAs, those are all voluntary workouts. You can't fine a player or anything like that for not showing up to that. But for mandatory minicamp, you get fined for missing that. And it will cost Danielle Hunter $100,000 not to show up. With that, there are a couple of things that I want to actually go over before we really get into questions, which are, one, the way holdouts work now, it is so much less powerful of an option for Danielle Hunter. In the past, you could really hold out and hold the contract over your team's head until they kind of were forced to either capitulate to your contract demands or trade you or release you, and you just could kind of do that. It is not nearly as profitable now. And in fact, there comes a point where it becomes a really, really bad idea for Danielle Hunter money-wise. And that's really what I want to focus on. So if you look at the 2020 CBA, the way it used to work before the 2020 CBA, which was sort of passed at the 11th hour right before everything locked down in March of 2020. So I think a lot of, there wasn't as much coverage of it as you would have usually had because we kind of had something else to talk about. But basically, the way holdouts used to work was that you would get a lot of fines for missing practice and missing games and stuff. But as part of a new contract negotiation, whenever you worked it out, the team could forgive those fines and not force you to pay them. That is no longer an option. Teams are no longer allowed to forgive fines, and these fines are mandatory. Some salary forfeiture or bonus forfeiture stuff is not mandatory, but the option is available to the teams and there's no going back on it. So the way it works now, you get a whole bunch of fines for not showing up to mandatory minicamp and then missing practices in training camp if things go on that way. And that's just money Danielle Hunter will never get back. Now, from Hunter's perspective, you pay $100,000 to not show up to minicamp, and that ends up being the pressure lever that the Vikings needed to up their offer by $500,000, well, then that was totally worth it for you, right? And that's really the calculus I want you to think of here, rather than trying to discern the personal tastes of someone who very famously doesn't even speak to the reporters who are reporting on this. Don't play that game, you'll go crazy. But instead, think of it that way, right? All right, what are the fines that Danielle Hunter is going to incur? And at what point is a little bit more of a contract value no longer worth it? Because for Danielle Hunter, whose contract is made primarily of signing bonus right now, his cap hit is made primarily of signing bonus that is prorated. That was the 2022 restructure that the Vikings did. So he's not actually making that money anymore. He already received it, but it counts against the Vikings cap. However, usually that's it. And it's just kind of, the Vikings basically have to reaccount for it on the salary cap, but the money has functionally changed hands. But now with a holdout, you actually can demand that money back depending on how much you miss. If you miss, I think after the 5th day of training camp that you miss. So on day 6 of holding out of training camp, you can start to require some of that forfeitable allocated salary or something like that is the phrase in the CBA. But basically that comprises signing bonus, roster bonus, workout bonus, stuff that is typically untouchable money. You can start to say, hey, you got to give us this back if you're not going to show up. And they can actually be forced to forfeit that money. You cannot do that to actual salary. However, if you miss a game, you don't get the game check, right? So that sort of works on its own system. But essentially, let's say Danielle Hunter holds out the entire season. He incurs a whole bunch of fines. He has to pay back he'd have to pay like $8 million he would have to pay back. And that requires him to miss all of camp, all of regular season, all of postseason if applicable, all of it, right? So that would be a very extreme scenario. But he would have to give back like $8 million and he wouldn't get any of his money. And yes, somebody did ask, that does affect the salary cap. So that's kind of where it is for Danielle Hunter. So you miss all of training camp, you can be forced to forfeit up to 25% of that pool of like $8 million. So is it worth $2 million to miss all of training camp and get a new deal? Well, maybe, if that means that missing training camp, was the difference between getting a deal, worth $5 million more or not, then forfeiting $2 million for that was worth it if it's guaranteed and if you feel good about it. And then there's risk management and stuff. But basically, from minicamp onwards, minicamp you get fines, but you're not being forced to forfeit any salary yet. From minicamp onwards, and once you get into actual proper training camp, that's really when the gloves are off, and then it becomes a risk management game. At what point does Danielle Hunter feel like holding out is no longer profitable for me? And at what point did the Vikings get nervous enough to say, hey, let's just start paying into his demands because he might be holding out for the rest of time here? And then, of course, complicating all of this is possible trade calls, right? What if somebody calls with a Godfather offer, which it seems to be that's where it is per reporting of ESPN, Kevin Seifert, Jeremy Fowler, I believe, too, and Tom Pelissero all kind of seem to be in lockstep about this, that, hey, it's going to, if you're going to trade Danielle Hunter, it's going to be significant capital, right? You're not going to dump him off for a 4th round pick. It's going to be at least a 2nd round pick, maybe more. And if you have a lot of suitors, you might be able to pit them against each other. And I guess that leads me to my first question, which comes from Shadow Flame, who says, let's say a team like the Patriots or similar caliber offer a 2024 first for Hunter. Are you taking the deal? The Patriots are interesting. I think their over-under is 7.5, maybe 8.5 wins. They're kind of a middle-of-the-road team, I guess, by win total. But I don't pretend to be able to predict that. I mean, you go off Vegas win totals, but that always ends up all over the place. I would say a first and change would have to be what it is for me to take Danielle Hunter. And really functionally, think of it this way. If you lose Danielle Hunter, I said this on the Minnesota Football Party too. If you lose Danielle Hunter to another team, your defense is effed. I mean, the edge group is Marcus Davenport and guys. That's awful. That's unacceptable, right? If you're asking me to go into the season with an unacceptable edge room, you need to make that the scenario that sets me up to get my 2024 quarterback, i.e., get me a pick I can use on that guy or get me a pick I can trade up to use on that guy. So a 3rd round pick, that's not enough. 2nd round pick, probably not enough. I need significant capital in 2024. 1st round pick. And yeah, I am kind of looking, hopefully, at a team that I'm hoping will draft in the top half. I need a top half 1st round pick to make that worth it to me. Otherwise, I'm just kind of pissing away value, and I don't want to be doing that. I'd much rather, that's the only way where it's better, in my opinion, than just paying Danielle Hunter what he's worth, which he's been owed that since long before Kwesi got here anyways. I will say with Kwesi, look, he didn't sign all these contracts, right? He didn't sign the Cook contract, the Thielen contract, the Kendricks contract, the Hunter contract. The only one is Zadarius Smith that I think we can really hold him to and say, hey, why didn't this play out a different way? But he is currently dealing with Rick Spielman contracts and trying to figure out how to get the books to look the way he wants them to look. And that's kind of why all this stuff is happening. But anyways, the next question comes from Anti-Gravity, who says, would the Vikings be better off long-term moving on from Danielle now versus giving him a market 3-year deal? Figure 2nd round plus change compensation. Yeah. So 2nd round plus change, I would probably need more. 1st round plus change. But we're close. We're in the ballpark, right? It's not too far off. But yeah, there comes a point where the draft compensation becomes worth it. But I don't know. It's really difficult for me to look at a 3-year market rate Danielle Hunter deal and be like, that's a bad idea. You know, he's a really good player. He was healthy last year, double-digit sacks last year, Pro Bowl and all of that. Deserved it. And I know a lot of people were really upset and they were like, where's Danielle Hunter? You just weren't looking close enough. You missed him. That's on you. He was very good. And I think the Vikings should just pay him. Like, I think if the Vikings fail to pay Danielle Hunter and he ends up demanding a trade to Buffalo, you know, then I think that that's a pretty strong failure on the Vikings' part. We can hold them accountable to that. I think this is a pretty easy situation to navigate. Just commit to something, Kwesi. Like, stop being so scared of it. You're going to lose your entire team because you're afraid to commit to any of it. With any luck, the next month is filled with extension news for the Vikings, and we can kind of move on from this weird period of drama. Let's keep going here. I've got a lot of other questions on other topics here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, so I'll make sure I can get to all of your cues and hopefully A them. But first, let me talk to you about the sponsor of today's episode, which is America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. If you make your way to FanDuel right now and you're a new customer, you can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet. That means if you sign up via FanDuel.com/lockedon, you make your first bet. Maybe you were going to bet on the Heat beating the Nuggets. Oh, shoot, I got it wrong, right? Congratulations to Denver, by the way. All right, you got it wrong. You whiffed. You can get up to $2,500 back in bonus bets. $2,500 back in bonus bets if you just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up to claim that no sweat first bet. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. They have all kinds of great promos on their website all the time, so check back periodically. They are safe and secure and very easy to use. They have an app that's great for this, and they pay out instantly when you win. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Claim that no sweat first bet for $2,500 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't hit, and get yourself a gambling. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks again to all of my #everydayers. Those of you who know how we do on Tuesdays, we just go right back into these mailbag episodes, and they get progressively weirder as things go on. But still some, I guess we'll call them current events to talk about. Spinner Jeremy asks, thoughts on Cam Jordan's statement about Kirk Cousins? Short answer, no, I do not have thoughts. Long answer, I guess for those of you who are not in the loop, Cam Jordan was at a pass rushing summit, a Von Miller summit, talking to like young defensive linemen. And he was making actually a pretty salient point, which is if you see a little and you can react to it quickly, then you're going to be in a better position as somebody who is slow, but reacting to more information. Essentially, if you see it, get it, right? And saying, you know, think fast, play fast. You'd rather be fast and wrong than slow and right. And I think that's absolutely true at most positions in the NFL. And he says, you know, slow and right. And then he says, like, we call that the Kirk Cousins. And everybody kind of giggles. And that's that. Well, of course, everybody's going to latch onto that last part rather than the actual point that he's making, which I think is kind of annoying because, I mean, Kirk Cousins holding the ball too long is absolutely a thing. It's a criticism he has gotten from many people in the league. It's a criticism that has carried with him throughout his entire career. Like that is, that's earned over a decade, man. Like there's not a lot of arguing against it anymore. You can band-aid it over with quick game. You can run a lot of play action and make it so that, you don't really, so that there's an excuse for holding the ball too long. But hey, waiting for things to come open and not throwing with anticipation when Kirk Cousins is in certain modes of his like brain. Yeah, that's a thing that happens. And there's a reason that like Cam Jordan's not the only person to say that. So everybody like chill out a little bit. But I guess I don't know, it's trash talk. So everybody just kind of quote tweeted that with a various clip of the Vikings doing something to the Saints, probably the overtime, a couple of overtime passes in the playoffs that one time or beating them in London or whatever. But I don't know, man, whatever. Really hard to care beyond like 2 minutes of conversation, whatever. Red and Purple asks, is there a wild possibility the D is vastly improved this year? Sure. Anything's possible. I don't know if I would put my cards on that, but basically I think if you're going to say, if a time traveler came to me from this time next year and said, yeah, actually the defense was like top 10, my guess for why would be that the blitzes worked. That Brian Flores came in, had all kinds of really cool pressures, and nobody actually had to be good because everything was like, I think Zimmer actually had some seasons like that where guys that like weren't actually very good were sort of balling. Just because of the way that the blitzes and high pressure stuff worked out. Hey, we got a bunch of young quarterbacks in the division. Maybe you just get them to fall apart under a constant threat. We're going to blitz 70% of the time, and if you can beat it, you can beat it, right? That would, I think, be the way that you go for. But otherwise, you've gone from Zadarius Smith to Marcus Davenport. That's a downgrade. You've gone from Eric Kendricks to Brian Asamoah. We can maybe hope that that's an upgrade, but I think that would be a pretty good outcome. You've gone from Patrick Peterson to Byron Murphy. I'm going to call it a wash for now, but I think there's a lot of outcomes that can be. And then you've gone from, guys at corner to other guys at corner. So I think the cornerback room was bad and certainly didn't markedly improve unless you really get something great in the second year out of guys like a Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth. So you kind of have to hang your hat on a lot of 2022 draft guys like really exploding, which is difficult to put your put faith in to really lean on. But that's going to be the way it would have to go. Otherwise, I don't know. It feels like they lost a bunch of players and are just replacing them with whoever their backups were. Skullaholics asks, what are the pros and cons of the Vikings using the franchise tag on Hockenson next year instead of extending him? So the pro is that it saves you money and flexibility, right? You don't have to commit to anything, which I guess Kwesi just doesn't want to commit to anyone. So maybe that's what he wants to do. But we know that that's not what he wants to do, that those two sides are actively engaged in contract talks. The con is that long-term, keeping TJ Hockenson gets more and more expensive the more you wait on it because the cap goes up, the market changes. Sign him in this cap environment now, he'll be making $15 million a year. If you sign a 4-year deal for that, by 2025 and 2026, he looks like a steal, right? And you can even sort of anticipate that, backload the contract so that he feels like a steal right now, and then he'll feel a little different later and stuff. Like that gives you a lot more options. And the other pro is you get to keep TJ Hockenson for longer because remember, the point of team building is not to amass the most assets, it's to build the best roster. So keeping guys on the team for a long time that remove a need and become a weapon and become something that actually creates generates production for you, that's the goal, the end goal here, right? You're not amassing the most liquid capital. You're actually building a roster. So I don't think that refusing an extension and then franchise tagging him next year, it's just too short term. Like what do we think we're going to not like TJ Hockenson? We like him. We want him for the next 4 years. Just like buy in now. But I guess, yeah, if he tears his ACL, then you can get out from under it and you're not really super exposed, but you got to start taking that risk with somebody. You can't build a franchise on 2-year deals, 1-year deals, you'd be rebuilding every single year. And I don't want to be the Jets. Jim Walsh asks, I'm wondering if there's any chance Jalen Reagor could be used as a running back vis-a-vis Cordero Patterson. If you give him 5 years to learn the position, I mean, it's a totally different position, right? It's a totally different set of skills that it requires. I don't think he has the frame for that too. Like Cordero Patterson's a much bigger guy than Jalen Reagor, if I recall. Yeah, Reagor is 5'11", 197. That's really slight for a running back, but also it's just that's a huge transition that not many people successfully make. And the reason Cordero Patterson made it successfully is because he was still in the league after 3 years of not being successful at it. And then finally he had now in year 4, he finally figured it out, but took that long. And for most guys, if you suck at a position for 2 years, you just don't get to be in the NFL anymore. You don't get that 3rd and 4th year to develop. So that Cordero Patterson thing is a pretty rare outcome and good for Cordero Patterson, right? That's really impressive, but we definitely can't apply it to other people willy-nilly. That's quite a mountain to climb. Chip asks, do you have any special concerns about fumbles among the running back room? I guess you have to answer that guy to guy. I don't know if there's any particular fumble issues with any of the top 3, Madison, Chandler, Wongwu, but there is one with Dwayne McBride. That was a huge thing for him coming out of college, so there is that definitely to watch. I've got a few more questions that I want to make sure that I get to, so let's roll into this. Keep things moving. Moving right along with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next question comes from Andrew S., who says, do you think Kwesi's contract is having an impact on Kirk's contract? Kwesi signs Kirk for any additional time. Is he potentially missing the opportunity to pick a rookie QB? I don't know if his contract really affects this, because with GM and coach contracts, because they don't count against the salary cap, it's really just about cash flow and the coffers of the Wilfs, and the Wilfs are never going to have are not going to attempt to like nickel and dime or anything like that. They'll give you guaranteed years of the contract, and if they fire you, they'll eat that, and that's fine. Similarly, they're not going to give you a 10-year, $100 million fully guaranteed contract like the Raiders did. That was a bad situation for the Raiders. So you have to be a little careful about it. But no, I do not think that your decision-making is going to be impacted by the length of your contract, because for the most part, GMs and head coaches will like never be in a contract year. Once you get to a contract year, you sign an extension, and then most of these guys, when they get fired with years left on their contract. It's just kind of how it works. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I will say is Kwesi's trying to get his QB of the future. Kirk Cousins ain't the QB of the future. Even if they buy into more Kirk Cousins and extend him, he's 35, right? Like eventually you have to move on to your guy and not the guy that you inherited. That's what's affecting things with Kirk Cousins. And we'll see how that all plays out if there is an extension this year or not. That will also kind of tell us just how open the Vikings are. They've said that they're open to the idea of Kirk Cousins as the QB beyond 2023, but actions speak louder than words, I guess. Bearded Scotty says draft Joe Milton and extend Kirk so Kirk can help tune Milton. He ain't polished. The guy throws 60 yards easy. Imagine that to JJ and Addison. Okay, I don't know who Joe Milton is. I don't even know if that's a real person. Sources are telling me that he is a Michigan player that just transferred to Tennessee and is in a QB competition. Okay, sure. I think my answer for all college QBs right now is going to be the same. It's an I don't know. I haven't watched anything except for like whatever I maybe picked up when I was watching one of their wide receivers. Like I watched a little Caleb Williams, a little bit of Drake May, watching Addison and like Josh Downs for this draft, but nothing that I can really stake a serious take on. Nothing that I can really like actually support a true evaluation on. And plus, why would you evaluate someone without seeing their final year? That's going to be where 95% of the analysis comes from, because that's the guy that they grew into, right? And if they're the same guy senior year as they were junior and sophomore year, then we'll kind of learn that too, right? But so my answer for all of these guys is going to be maybe, sure, I don't know. But this Joe Milton guy, if he's not like supposed to be a first round prospect, if he's not supposed to be like an actual bona fide starting QB, and he's just like a sort of random Devy flyer, we kind of have our Devy flyer in Jaron Hall already. So I'd probably want to do something a little more serious. But hey, maybe he explodes Joe Burrow style, comes out of nowhere and becomes, a top 5 prospect in the class, in which case we'll revisit that conversation. David Whitting asks, which Viking will be our Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee? Oh, that's fun, because Adam Thielen's gone. He was it for a long time. I think it was was it Kendricks last year? I forget who it was last, but yeah, they've lost a lot of their like kind of leadership figures. I think Alexander Madison is a really good guess for this one. I would be shocked to see it be Kirk Cousins. Wouldn't be shocked to see it be KJ Osborne. There's a lot of people doing a lot of really good stuff, the My Cause, My Cleat stuff. I will once again point you to Lindsey Young's Getting Open series. You will see a lot of stuff there. It's on Vikings.com. You'll see a lot of that kind of stuff there if you're interested in the sort of philanthropic works that the Vikings are doing. And also it's just like really well-written profiles on a lot of players. That series has been going on forever. It's one of my favorite things in all of Vikings media. Sammy asks, what is your process of researching a player for the Everyman series? Oh, that's fun. Okay, so it's Googling a lot and there's certain Google tricks that will help you get backstory stuff, because I'm looking for like puff pieces and articles that really tell more of a family story or a personality story. Rather than a lot of times if you just Google like Alexander Madison, you'll just get like his Boise State bio, right? And it'll just be like, he got this many yards, or this many tackles, and blah, blah, blah. He went to this high school, and it's like kind of dry. So for me, it's just finding all that information by using the right keywords and stuff. And a lot of it is trying to use Google's like find me articles from before 2018, because then you won't find stuff about him as a draft prospect, and usually a player who is in the NFL is probably going to have a write-up from his hometown, from his college newspaper, if not full-on profiles in The Athletic or the ESPN or whatever. A lot of these players have that too, right? Over a long time, somebody wrote about you. You made it to the NFL. You were special to somebody. And there is something really cool about how reliable that is. I can find that on like most guys. You have to get to like the really deep undrafted Division II offensive linemen before it starts to become hard to find stuff on people. And then from there, it's just putting it together and storytelling, which is a skill that I've personally been crafting for like 2 decades at this point, since I was 10, and finding a way to tell the story in a compelling way and really capture the ethos of who I read the person to be, and keeping it as sympathetic too, because there are Vikings players that I like don't have as high of evaluations on than other Vikings players, but for this, it's really important to me to be positive and supportive of all times, kind of no matter what. It's like the point of the series, and I think that that's a good exercise too, to just even the guys you don't really like, remember that they're people with dreams. Dylan Peterson asks, everyone was posting that video of Marcus Davenport in coverage on Kenu Nwangwu saying how great he looks, but I'm just getting flashbacks of Donatel dropping Hunter and Smith in a coverage. What's going on here? So yeah, that'll happen. Basically, anytime you are in an odd front, 3-4, you can get bumped over to covering a running back, right? Basically, if you have all of your players on one side of the field, like 3-by-1 or even 4-by-1, like if you have a lot of receivers on one side of the field and you run a running back on the wheel route to the other side of the field, somebody who is not a corner, because all the corners are going to go over where the receivers are, is going to cover that, right? Or maybe there's one receiver here, but he's way to the outside and he's got his job. And in fronts that don't have 3 linebackers, right? So Barr, Kendricks, Ben Gedeon, right? That's your 4-3. It's either a Ben Gedeon type doing that, or you go get a defensive lineman that's coming off the edge doing that because the other 2 linebackers have a job. So it's just kind of a quirk of being in base personnel in the way the Vikings will run base personnel. You get a few bigger guys, you're better against the run, but sometimes you need a defensive end to run with a wheel route, and those guys need to be able to do that. That's a really difficult concept to execute. So from a lot of defensive coaches' perspectives, it's, hey, if they can hit that, God bless them, and we just want our guy to be able to hit a landmark, turn around, run, do his best. Davenport did okay on that. I actually don't think it was as much of a win as it looked like from that clip. And I think that was, he made the window tight, I guess, but I think one has to come down with that. Either way, don't overanalyze one clip from OTAs. They're learning and installing as much as they are evaluating. Chris asks, this will be the last one of the day, do you think that a tournament-level Madden player could break 500 calling plays for the Vikings, assuming KOC and Flores handed them their playbooks? Could they even win a game? I think the Vikings could maybe win a game in spite of this. Like if you think of, you load your playbooks into a random number generator and it just spits out plays for you. Like, hey, if the players execute all those plays right, then the sequencing, it'll be bad, but you might be able to win in spite of it. I think a tournament level Madden player would absolutely have poor play sequencing because there's so many other nuances and pieces to play calling that just are not captured by Madden, and even run counter to the logics of Madden. Madden is about manipulating AI and, finding typical holes in coverage that are kind of the same for every team. Whereas, if you had a layman is really what you're asking, calling plays, you would have to be scouting week to week and stuff. And that's a skill that they wouldn't really have. But even if you didn't have a layman at all and you just did completely random plays with no sequencing whatsoever, I'm sure that at certain points execute enough of those plays well and you could still kind of win in spite of that, but you'd be at a heavy disadvantage. So I'm sure that they could probably steal a game, but it would be a very, very heavy disadvantage for sure. Tomorrow, I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. I don't know, I've got this some really X's and O's run game stuff to do. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about quarterbacks or maybe the corners or something like that. We'll see. We got a lot of Everyman to do as well. We'll see what strikes my fancy. And I hope you stick around for it. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.